You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and I'm Chevy Lynn Vasky with the K-State Radio Network. K-State and Washburn University law professor Roger McEowen starts the show by discussing what young families need to know about Trump accounts and the impact high corn yields may have on producers. The show continues with K-State Precision Agriculture Specialist Deepak Joshi, along with K-State agronomists Tina Sullivan and Logan Simon, as they explain how drone technology can be a useful tool in the late crop season. We wrap up the show with K-State beef cattle experts who provide insight on limit feeding calves and assessing manure to support cattle health. That and more is coming up ahead on this episode of Agriculture Today. You're tuned back into Agriculture Today, and we start today's show with Roger McEowen, K-State and Washburn law professor. Roger, thank you for taking the time to join us today.
Thanks for having me, Chevy.
The One Big Beautiful Bill Act has introduced several new things, and one of those happens to be a savings account.
Yeah, this is a new savings vehicle to help parents of newborns build a foundation of wealth for their children, and these are called Trump accounts. And they are universal child savings accounts, and this has never been done before. So this is the first, at least federal initiative of its kind, and it's something I think that new parents are going to want to look at.
And how are the funds invested?
Well, once these really kick in, basically starting January 1 of next year, parents can open a Trump account for children that are born from 25, 26, 27, and 28. So after 24 and before 29. These are just temporary as of right now. And the parents and the child have to have Social Security numbers. They have to be U.S. citizens. And one of the big features of these accounts is that the government's going to seed it. The first $1,000 in the account is going to be a contribution from the government, and that's going to be adjusted annually for inflation. So next year it'll be a little bit more, and then a little bit more for the accounts that are started in those out years. And the annual contributions are capped at $5,000 per beneficiary every year. That's on an after-tax basis, so you don't get a tax deduction to put them in. This is after tax. And to further incentivize the savings, the parent's employer can contribute $2,500 to the account. Now, that's not in addition to the $5,000. That counts toward the $5,000 cap, and that's on a tax-free basis. And any employer contributions, again, that's not included in income for the employee, so that's why I said it's on a tax-free basis. The funds, they're going to be invested, this is a specification in the law, in low-fee U.S. equity index mutual funds. And that should provide, I think the idea behind that is to provide diversification and make it low cost and keep things simple.
And when can you withdraw?
Well, withdrawals are not permitted before the beneficiary reaches age 18, and that is really kind of the cornerstone of the whole program. They're designed to ensure that funds are available for that child's transition into adulthood. Now, there are some limited exceptions. Funds can be rolled over from one Trump account into another Trump account or to an ABLE account. Those are accounts for disabled beneficiaries, and so Congress also in the ABA, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, they did loosen up some of the restrictions with respect to ABLE accounts to make them more attractive. So if you have a child with a disability, you can move the funds into that type of account. And distributions could also be allowed to correct and withdraw contributions that exceeded the annual limit. And then, of course, if the beneficiary dies before turning age 18, withdrawals are permitted in that instance. But you've got to have one of these exceptional circumstances to be able to withdraw the funds before the beneficiary turns 18.
How do you suspect firms will market this?
Well, that could cut both ways. That's a good question. One, the temporary nature of this could limit the incentive for firms to promote these Trump accounts. I think the answer is going to be really, it depends. On one hand, there is a strong incentive for financial institutions to get involved. There's a new government-backed savings program, and the seed contribution up front, that should be pretty attractive to new clients and help these firms attract clients that are interested in these. And financial institutions typically compete to offer and administer these new government-sponsored savings plans, such as, for example, the 529 plans that have been out there, the college savings plans or health savings accounts, because those products bring in new deposits with them and can lead to broader investment relationships with that particular firm. And I think that's likely what's going to happen here. They're not going to promote them as a standalone package just simply because I don't think there's enough money in them given how the funds have to be invested. They can't generate sufficient fees on them on a standalone basis. But as part of a broader package tied into other types of retirement accounts that are long-term and permanent in nature, then, yeah, I think that might work. So you, for example, could open a Trump account, and the bank that opens that might be the first to offer that family a checking account or a debit card or a mortgage down the line, because likely these are going to be young families starting out in marriage and starting a family that create these accounts. So they would be in line to maybe get that first mortgage, debit card, those types of things. And I could see it being tied into that. But again, the short-term nature of these right now, that's going to cause, I think, some brokerage firms to pause and think their strategy, but we'll see how it works out.
What else is important for people to consider when it comes to Trump accounts?
Well, what happens with the funds, of course, when the beneficiary turns 18, and that's the way that the program is structured, so that when the beneficiary turns 18, the account effectively turns into a traditional IRA. And then at that point in time, the beneficiary can manage the account under your standard rules that apply to traditional IRAs. So you could convert it to a Roth. You couldn't convert it to a 401k. And the whole chassis of a Trump account is that it's a custodial IRA. It's not a 401k. And so the transition at age 18 is the transition to an IRA. That's the path for the account's future. And so it's a good start on getting an IRA at the time you turn 18. But the key to this whole thing is, will Congress turn it into a permanent vehicle in the stable of investment choices that people have? And if so, I think this could be a pretty big deal, because if I take, let's just round it off, say 20 years, $5,000 a year, you put some growth on that, yeah, you're going to graduate high school and there's going to be well over $100,000 in this account. You could start to fund things with that. And that could be very helpful as getting people started in life. So that's the whole point of this. I hope it works out. We'll just see what Congress does with it in future years.
Roger, you mentioned that some firms might be a little bit hesitant about this. Can you go into some more detail?
I think the level of promotion for brokerage firms is going to depend on the rules and regulations that are established for the accounts, and we haven't seen those yet. And the plan is, the announcement has been made, is that those rules are going to be forthcoming either this fall or early in 2026, when you can actually start creating these accounts and putting money in them. Now, when they do come out, the more straightforward the rules are, the easier it's going to be for financial institutions to offer these accounts and market them. And while the accounts might be beneficial for consumers, financial institutions are going to have to make sure there's a clear path for their own profitability, whether that's through management fees on the invested assets or the ability to cross-sell other products, like I mentioned before. I think if they can find a way to package with other products that they're marketing to clients, this will work. If Congress could turn these into a long-term vehicle rather than just the 4 years, that's going to help too. So the firms are going to have to figure out how they're going to create materials and explain the benefits of the accounts and how they work, and figure out whether they can push them as a long-term wealth-building vehicle and with that type of potential. So we'll see. The dirt's going to be in the details, as they say, but the first step's going to be to see what the regs are when they come out in a few months.
Roger, something else that our listeners might be curious about, the USDA has put a report out that we have record corn crop this year, and what are we going to do with the existing inventory? What should producers be concerned about right now?
Yeah, and I just published a blog article on this. It's also on Ag Manager website through the Department of Ag Econ at K-State. And you got a couple of things going on here. You've got carryover, and then you've got what's predicted to be a bumper crop. Now, we'll see, but we've had favorable weather conditions and, of course, advanced farming techniques and strategic planting decisions that are coming together all at once, and it looks like we're going to have a bumper harvest. So that's going to present a challenge for the sector. And the fundamental question is not whether the infrastructure can handle the volume, but how the nation's grain storage and the logistics systems absorb the crop without incurring substantial financial losses and compromising the quality of the crop. So I think the infrastructure is there, and that's only half of the equation. The other half is the scale of the harvest. So if you put the scale of the harvest with infrastructure issues, then we've got to look at options that farmers have. Now, there's off-farm storage, there's going to be on-farm storage, and that's going to be driven by the economics of it. And then we've got the whole spoilage issue. So if we have inadequate or improper storage, that can lead to a complete loss of a harvested crop. And moisture content is going to be your big one there. So what are the solutions? Well, you've got outdoor ground piles, you've got grain bags, you've got temporary indoor spaces, and then, of course, long-term on-farm investment. That's more than just a temporary solution, but that requires financing in many instances. Many farmers may not have the cash to do that, and so there are some USDA farm storage facility loan programs that are available, and I talk about that in my piece. What are the various loans that are out there? And then, of course, various technological innovations can help this. But a lot of these are not short-term solutions. These are going to be longer-term solutions to deal with a bumper crop. So I would encourage people to take a look at that piece and see what they think on that.
Roger, thank you for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you for having me.
Again, that was K-State and Washburn Law professor Roger McEowen as he covered Trump accounts and what producers can expect with this year's corn yields. I will be sure to link the resources that Roger mentioned in today's show on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll have more for you up ahead. You're tuned back into Agriculture Today, and we continue our show with K-State Agronomy Department faculty Logan Simon, Deepak Joshi, and Tina Sullivan. Thank you all for taking the time to join us today.
Yeah, thank you, Sylvie.
And as farmers are always trying to work towards being more efficient, what are some of the tools that they can use or are currently using in this later season?
Thanks, Evie. I think there are many tools that can be used by our grower, which can help to save the time as well as save the labor as well. So one of the most famous and popular tool right now is a drone, obviously. They are used for multiple purposes in agriculture, especially for mapping, as well as for operation purpose like spraying as well. So these drones, for the especially mapping purpose, during the growing season, we can use their map to create the NDVI map. And based on NDVI map, we can identify their growth pattern, their health, and their if there are any stress in the plant in our field. So they can be used for various purposes.
And can you talk a little bit about what goes into calculating those maps and things like that?
Especially drone, they have a special sensor, or we can call it camera as well. And those sensor and camera, they capture the different light reflected by any object like crop or soil, and based on that we can determine their health condition. So using that images, we can usually determine the NDVI map. NDVI map give you idea about the crop health condition. If the NDVI value is high, that means the crop is healthy, and if it's low, that means might be the less plant germination, or there might be some other stress. So based on those map, we can scout our field and we can determine the crop health condition using those maps.
And can you remind our listeners what NDVI stands for?
Actually, yeah, NDVI stands for Normalized Difference Vegetation Index, which is calculated using the NIR reflectance minus red light reflectance divided by NIR plus red light reflectance. So those light reflectance are captured by the sensor in the drone.
And what about NDRE?
Yeah, NDRE is another vegetation index, similar with NDVI, but NDVI is more popular and very common. But NDRE is a kind of new vegetation index. It helps, especially help and useful during the later growing season, because NDVI have a saturation issue sometimes, because NDVI, as I mentioned, high NDVI is determined the higher health of the crop. But during the later growing season, even a crop is green, the NDVI doesn't increase. Actually, it gets saturated. But to overcome that issue, we usually use the NDRE, which doesn't have an issue with the saturation. So NDRE is also useful for determining the crop health, actually.
And Deepak, you talked a little bit about NDVI and NDRE and what they mean, but how exactly do you interpret those numbers?
Yeah, thank you. Usually the NDVI value ranges from 0 to 1 for the crop, and 0.6 to 1 is a higher value, and they are considered for the dense vegetation as well as a very healthy crop condition. And 0.2 to 0.5 is called a moderate health condition and moderate coverage. And 0 to 0.2 NDVI value is considered plant in the stress condition. So these value can be used for determining the different crop condition using the NDVI value. And similarly, it's the same for the NDRE as well. Its value range from 0 to 1, and higher value is for the healthy plant and higher canopy coverage. And similarly, lower value or close to the 0 is considered for the stress condition or lower canopy coverage of the plants.
The drones are able to help farmers, but is this something that is going to replace them going out in the field, or is it more of a tool and an assistant to them?
Yeah, so these remote sensing technologies and sensors that are able to make maps of NDVI, NDRE, they're really helpful tools in our toolbox to increase our precision and coverage over whole fields, whole farms, especially thinking about that end of season, those really tall, difficult to navigate crop fields. But at the same time, they are not a complete replacement for in-field scouting. And so we really encourage our producers, our agronomists, and consultants out there to be utilizing this tool to increase our ability to monitor those crops out there. But keep in mind, there's a lot that can be missed if we are not out there, boots on the ground, and seeing what's happening out there in the crop.
And kind of thinking about, using these tools towards the end of the season. Some folk may be, kind of considering we're towards the end. There's not a whole lot more that in some of our crops that we could be doing. But if we think about our late season crops, even as some of our corn is drying down and some of the disease or insect issues we could be dealing with, using the tools such as remote sensing or the NDVI maps, we can kind of pinpoint where some issues could be, to kind of see if there's been look back at patterns and then be more prepared for going forward, or target where those boots on the ground scouting options need to be. So we're not saying, maybe there's a whole field situation, or maybe more of it's an edge effect, or more of a centralized area in the field. So using both sets of tools in the toolbox will be the best combination for this end of season scouting.
Tina, if we are at the end of the growing season, how can collecting this data help growers going forward?
So going forward with this and near the end of season, and not just thinking about yield maps, we can kind of use it for planning ahead, especially when we start thinking about biotic and abiotic stressors that were occurring in this season, and see if they're going to be a continuous problem going forward. Logan will talk a little bit about our abiotic. I'll briefly mention our living problems, such as disease, insects, and weeds. If we think about weeds, we might be able to see different patterns of higher infestations of weeds in a part of a field. And there's a lot of talk about see and spray technology, so that could be a pairing up. When it comes to disease, such as sudden death syndrome, or SDS, in soybeans, we could use these NDVI late season maps to see over time if we're getting worse and worse severity, and if it's changing throughout the season. And with insects, it could kind of give us a better idea of where or when those insects are coming into a stand.
And then over on the abiotic side, some other things that we can be looking out for would be patches in our fields that are more prone to drought stress. That could be due to differences in topography or soil type in the field. Along with that line, we can also be thinking about some of our nutrient deficiencies that show up in a disuniform pattern in the field. That is another thing that this end of season drone scouting can help us to identify and make changes and address with our management for the next season.
And as we look ahead to the future, how do we see this growing in popularity among producers as far as being used, and also the accuracy and how much it's being tested, therefore it can continue to improve efficiency? Is there any research being done on that?
Actually, there are many research going on using the drone. So drone not only for the scouting purpose, so they can be used for many purposes for our decision-making purpose. For example, they can be used for determine the nitrogen rate for the field, identify the nutrient deficiency, and based on that, we can recommend the nitrogen to the crop. So moreover, nitrogen or even different sensor using drone like thermal sensor that can be used to determine the plant temperature, and based on that, we can make the decision related with the irrigation. So there are so many further application of the drone as well. So we are continue exploring these kind of application, doing various other researches as well.
And is there anything else that producers or growers should think about when it comes to drone technology, or is there any important reminders for them?
So drone technology is getting popular, and these can be used for many purposes. And as Logan mentioned, they cannot be replacement for the visible scouting. So we should combine both together, like technology and visible scouting together. And also when we use the drone technology, and we should also follow the FAA rule and regulations as well. So to fly drone, there are some rule and regulation. We need to have authorized drone pilot license, and we need to follow all the rule and regulation by the FAA.
If growers are interested in investing in this, are there any resources or places that they should go to learn more about this?
Yeah, they can reach out to us as well at K-State. We'll be happy to help and discuss on the related with the various drone-based work as well as drone-based research as well.
Thank you all for taking the time to join us today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Again, I was joined by Kansas State University's Deepak Joshi, Precision Ag Extension Specialist, along with K-State agronomists Logan Simon and Tina Sullivan, as they discussed crop monitoring with drone-based remote sensing technology. If you're interested in learning more about this topic, you can check it out at eupdate.agronomy.ksu.edu. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll have more for you up ahead on Agriculture Today.
You're tuned in to Agriculture Today. I'm Madeline Drake, in for Shelby Varner. And we continue our show with K-State's Brad White, Philip Lancaster, Bob Larson, and Scott Fritz on the Beef Cattle Institute's Cattle Chat podcast.
When we've got calves on feed, and Philip, I'm going to start with you. When we put calves on feed, if we're limit feeding versus maybe providing them feed with a limiter or providing them some other source, what are the pros and cons of limit feeding when I'm getting calves on feed or they're already on feed?
Let's make sure we're clear here when we're talking about limit feeding. Limit feeding, it means that we're limiting the total ration, that's grain and roughage. It's not where we're limiting the amount of grain and then they've got free choice hay or pasture or whatever to fill up on. And so if we are truly limit feeding, what we're doing is we're using a diet that's a little bit higher energy density, and we're limiting the amount of it to achieve the rate of gain we want. So calves grow, put on muscle and frame. They're not getting over conditioned. But lots of times from a cost efficiency standpoint, that diet is actually more profitable or economic than a high roughage type growing diet, because the feed conversion of that diet is a whole lot better. And so some of the benefits from a feed conversion standpoint, I'm using feed ingredients that are more digestible than hay, but also one of the things that I do is I decrease the size of the visceral organs in the animal the size of the rumen and other stuff is not as large because they're not handling all that bulky hay, and that cuts down on their maintenance requirement. And so that in itself also makes them more efficient. And so there are some real benefits to doing it, but there are also some challenges that you have to have the right equipment, you have to have the right pens set up, bunk space, other things like that to make it work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the ways that we gauge how those calves are doing on feed, we may look at manure consistency. So manure consistency, Todd, Bob, Scott, what are you looking for?
Well, one thing, we can kind of use the extremes. So a cow out on pasture that's pretty dormant, pretty rank pasture. Well, you know what those cow pies look like. They stack pretty high. They're pretty dry, pretty low in moisture. Versus either a cow on green grass or a feedlot calf on a pretty high energy diet, a lot more fluid in the manure pad. And so what you're really wanting is for the manure to be appropriate for the diet that they're on. So really what I'm looking for is, first of all, knowing what's appropriate for this type of a diet, and then looking for animals that are producing a manure that's different than that. It's either too dry or too wet compared to what it should be for the diet that they're on.
So the scenario Philip gave, lemon feeding, we're getting those calves to gain. Todd, what would you expect that manure to look like?
Well, I would hope that it wouldn't be bubbly. I would hope that I don't see a lot of gas bubbles in that manure pad. And the reason for that is because if I do, that means I've got a lot of hindgut fermentation. I've got a lot of ruminal acidosis that's causing hypermotility. I'm getting starches that are bypassing the rumen. They're going into the hindgut. And it tells me that my digestive system isn't working as well as it could. So those would be things I don't want to see. I would expect some, grain particles, because not all grain is highly, so there's parts of the grain that aren't highly digestible. So I expect it to be looser. I would expect it to be a little bit more of a, not runny, but more of a soft serve is the right
Eating that one's
description here. I would expect to see some looser stools, but what I don't want is to see a lot of gas in that stool.
Yeah, the soft serve that's working right. For the handle, it's not too liquidy.
That's right.
Okay. And Scott, and I'm aware of the wordplay, any red flags you would want to watch out for?
Yeah, I think it's always good to look at color. So you can, if you've got black tarry stools, may indicate some hemorrhage further up, from an ulcer or something. They're digesting the blood. It turns black. It's really sticky. If you've got frank red blood, that kind of indicates a more distal bleed, if you will, that, some infectious diseases, coccidiosis, some of those things would look like that. So color, I think, is an important thing to look at as well.
Once again, that was part of the Beef Cattle Institute's Cattle Chat podcast with Brad White, Scott Fritz, Philip Lancaster, and Bob Larson. That's all we have for you today on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you tomorrow.